I want to play it smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
A brand new start.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush! I want to fly.
Yanko Bongo, let's go. Give great a try.
Live your best life every day with a smart network. Hush! Go smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go! Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush!
I want to play it smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
A brand new start.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush! I want to fly.
Yanko Bongo, let's go. Give great a try.
Live your best life every day with a smart network. Hush! Go smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go! Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush!
I want to play it smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
A brand new start.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush! I want to fly.
Yanko Bongo, let's go. Give great a try.
Your best life every day with a smart network. Hush! Go smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go! Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush!
I want to play it smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
A brand new start.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush! I want to fly.
Yanko Bongo, let's go. Give great a try.
Live your best life every day with a smart network. Hush! Go smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go! Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush!
I want to play it smart.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
A brand new start.
Yanko Bongo, let's go!
Hush! I want to fly.
Yanko Bongo, let's go. Give great a try.
Live your best life every day with a smart network. Hush! Go smart.
Sorry, we can't hear you. You're on mute, maybe.
No, cannot be heard.
Nishadini, I think there's an issue with your mic. You're not
Can you
muted,
hear
but oh, now we can hear.
you heard faintly, but not loud.
Sorry for the inconvenience. There's some technical issue. I'll start over. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on right to information and the private sector, conducted by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and the Transparency International Sri Lanka. On the onset, I would like to thank our corporate sponsors, Hutchinson Telecommunication Lanka Private Limited, London Stock Exchange Group Sri Lanka. Without further ado, I would like to inform everyone of the house rules. Kindly switch off your cameras and mute your microphones. Only the speaker will use their video and audio for the presentation and dialogue. Questions from the participants will only be taken through the chat box. A recording of the session will be shared on conclusion of the session. I now welcome Mr. Shiran Fernando, the Chief Economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, to make the opening remark. Over to you, Mr. Shiran.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon and warm welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to provide the opening remarks at today's webinar and to start the proceedings off. This has been, I think, a culmination of discussions and collaboration that Transparency International Sri Lanka and the Chamber has been looking to get put together, and I think this will be the first of many such initiatives that we hope to engage with TISL, in particular in educating the private sector. So this collaboration with TISL, I think with the Sri Lankan chapter of TISL, which is one of the leading global movements against corruption, has been something that has been in plans for the last few months from the Chamber's point of view. TISL, as we all know, has been a very strong advocate for the creation of the RTI law in Sri Lanka for many years, and has been active, I think, since its enactment as well, providing a range of training and assistance to the public authorities, civil society, and the general public on the RTI as well. RTI, as you know, is a very important anti-corruption tool, which also allows businesses to access information held by public authorities. And we've seen numerous organizations, research firms, civil society using RTI to access information and provide the analysis and insights to the wider audience as well. And we've seen a lot of the benefits of RTI, which I'm sure the panel discussion will get into as well. So this session offer insights in respect of the benefits of RTI, including how the private sector can really actively use some of the legislation, some of the provisions to its benefit and enhance a more positive public perception of this. And the private sector, as you know, has been identified as a public authority liable to respond to RTI requests in certain and specific instances, and maybe we can understand a bit more about that during today's discussion as well. So the webinar will be conducted by leading experts in the field of anti-corruption and governance, trade and policy development, and legal affairs. We will have Transparency International Sri Lanka Deputy Executive Director Sankita Gunaratna and Verite Research Director Subhashini Abesingha, who are today's session. We warmly welcome them and thanks for their presence and participation today as well. And the session will be moderated by Mokshini Jaimana, who is an attorney at law, who almost counts 15 years in active practice in the private bar. Let me introduce a little bit about her and then hand it over to her as well. So her practice has been in the areas of family law, money recovery, land disputes, testimony matters, labor and commercial arbitration. She has been an active member of the Bar Council for over a decade and has held positions of leadership in the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, convening several standing and subcommittee meetings of the Bar Association, including the Law Development Subcommittee and the Future of Legal Education Subcommittee. the co-chairperson of the Women's Committee of the and she's also a member of the Committee for the Review appointed by the Ministry of Justice. And an extension of this role has been appointed as the convener of the Advisory Committee on Family Law Reform. She's also been the host of Channel I's Law and Order TV show, during which she interviewed several respected legal personalities, not only from the practice, but also those engaged from the public and the private sector as well, civil society and academia, on different topics of interest to the public. She's also, beyond her law, also speech and drama teacher with over 20 years of experience, and recently established Storyland Sri Lanka on multiple social media platforms. So we're really privileged to have you moderate the session, and let me hand it over to you and wish TASL and Chamber Academy all the best for this session, and to the partners as well. Hope it will be enriching as we learn more about the RTI and its usage. Over to you, Mokshini. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that introduction. And my thanks also is extended to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for taking the initiative to organize this webinar on an extremely important topic, and that is the right to information and the private sector. You know, usually we speak about the right to information from a rights perspective, and when we talk about rights perspectives, we don't really give much thought to what kind of role the private sector would play in in the use of the right to information. So it would be extremely beneficial to every single one of us. And when I say us, I include myself as well as all the participants this evening, to understand how the right to information in its purest sense, that means the right, and also in the form of legislation, how it can be made use of by the private sector, how it can be of benefit to the private sector, and the corollary aspects related to that. So as mentioned earlier, we have an esteemed panel of speakers this afternoon. I will introduce them to you in no particular order, but we have from Transparency International Sri Lanka, its Deputy Executive Director, Sankitha Gunaratna. By way of introduction, Sankitha is a graduate of the Faculty of Law of the University of Colombo. She is also an attorney at law and a Scrivening Scholar with a Master's in Corruption and Governance. She currently serves on the board of UNCAC Coalition, an international umbrella organization for NGOs working on the subject of corruption. She has experience in legal practice in company and tax law and has worked with multiple governance-related civil society organizations prior to joining TISL. She is an anti-corruption advocate with years of experience pushing for transparent, accountable, and participatory governance in Sri Lanka. She specializes in right to information, election campaign finance, public sector integrity, private sector corruption, and international asset recovery, having been an ardent advocate for policy and legislative reform in these areas. Her past work spans from project management to advocacy and community training. Sankitha, welcome to this program, and thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of it.
Thanks, Moshini.
So next in line is Subhashini Abhay-Singha. She's Research Director at Verite Research. Subhashini is an economist specializing in international trade. She is an expert on Sri Lankan economy, private sector development, trade policy, WTO, regional trade agreements, ports, and logistics. In addition to these, her current research includes data-driven analysis of China's economic engagement in Sri Lanka. Very apt in these times. She has a bachelor's degree in economics, first-class honors, a master's degree in economics from the University of Colombo, and also she holds a master's degree in international law and economics, summa cum laude, from World Trade Institute, University of Bern, Switzerland. Subhashini is currently working as a director of research at Verite Research, a research and strategy firm based in Colombo. Verite has been doing a lot of educating of the public in recent times on the economic crisis that is facing Sri Lanka at the moment, and I believe Verite does not need any introduction. But by way of Subhashini's involvement at Verite Research, she takes an active role in educating the public on the right to information, more particularly where the private sector is concerned. Subhashini will be educating us on the kind of work Verite also does, where it assists persons to invoke the provisions of the Right to Information Act, and also in educating those on how the Right to Information Act can be utilized for their purposes, in particular where organizations and the private sector is concerned. She has worked for the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for nearly 10 years as a senior economist. She has also worked as a visiting lecturer at the Faculty of Graduate Studies of University of Colombo and Sir John Kotalavala Defence University in Sri Lanka. Welcome, Subhashini. It is truly an honor to be on the same panel as you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Mokshini. Great to be here.
Right, so let's get on to the main topic, the right to information and the private sector. My first question will be posed to Sankita in view of the fact that she has been playing an active role in Transparency International Sri Lanka's work in advocating for the introduction of the law and thereafter for the utilization of the law in Sri Lanka. Sankita, my question to you is quite simply about what the Act is. Let's get down to the brass tacks, right? So we all know that, there has been a great deal of advocacy, a lot of work has gone into the introduction of the law into the body of law in Sri Lanka. We know that the Right to Information Act was passed in August 2016, but in addition to that, by way of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution in 2015, the right to information was also recognized as a fundamental right of the people of Sri Lanka. Now, prior to this, the Supreme Court has informally recognized that the right to information is a fundamental right of all citizens of Sri Lanka, but that was only through judicial pronouncements. It was not through any amendment to the law. And it was in 2015 that we saw this changing. We have seen several movements, several moves taken to recognize the right to information. We saw the RKW Gunasekara committee in 1996, and it was this committee, if I'm not mistaken, that first articulated the core elements of this right, and that some of them being the giving of information being the rule rather than the exception, and the refusal of the information being the exception, that there should be an equal right for everyone to access that information, that no justification is needed when requesting the relevant information, whereas the refusal should be justified, and also the fact that judicial action can be taken against rejection. We saw the Sri Lanka Law Commission advocating for the access for information. So it has taken various forms. So Sankita, my question to you is, before the culmination of the amendment to the Constitution and the introduction of the Right to Information Act to the body of laws in Sri Lanka in 2016, there has been a lot that has gone into ensuring it would take place. So my question to you is twofold. Number one is, why has this been recognized? Why has this been given such a lot of importance? What is the importance of the right to information? Number two, what is the Right to Information Act? So you can address the question in whichever way you choose, but if you could just enlighten our audiences on this particular topic while addressing those two aspects.
Thank you, Mokshini, and also for so well outlining the history of how we got to this place we are now. And hello to our audience as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to be speaking to mostly private sector audience about this very important topic. So if I were to summarize what RTI is, as you asked, Mokshini, I would say it is the single most important tool in the fight against corruption. So it is also a tool that everyone must have across countries, across the globe, that it's something everybody must have, every democratic society must have. And it is something that every government needs to try and assure for its people. And why this is what's important, right? So if you think about information, it doesn't sound very interesting or exciting to someone, right? Because information brings to mind images of data and reels of paper. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about, because information means substance. Information means accountability. Information also means that you generally know what's going on behind red tape, behind closed doors. So why it's important to people is, as a participant in this in a democracy, as constituents, as voters, as taxpayers, people, businesses, all of whom contribute to society, should have access to this kind of information in order to know what's going on around them. How is the road being built? How are decisions being made about national policies on certain things? What kind of approvals do I need when I want to get something done? If I want to get a government license to conduct my business, how do I do it? What's the process? How much time does it take? Who are the other key players that applied? On what basis was I refused? So this kind of information is really critical to us in order for us to be able to formulate our thoughts, to make day-to-day decisions, to be able to plan accordingly. So that's why information is important. Now, all of this still sounds a little abstract, right? So let me bring it down to brass tacks. So since the RTI Act was operationalized in Sri Lanka in 2017, on the 3rd of February was the first time that citizens could start using RTI, the RTI Act in Sri Lanka. Since then, we saw citizens asking for information about their family members who had disappeared. This was on the first day of the operationalization of the RTI Act. So that is not abstract. That is very much your lived reality, right? And in the same way, even TISL went and requested asset declarations of the president and the prime minister. We asked for information about the political financial details of political parties, right? Because that is important for voters to know, for people to know in the public interest. So this is the kind of information you can ask for. So it is important for people to be able to plan and make decisions, and even decide on who to vote for, right? So in the same way, I can give you multiple examples of how citizens have asked why there was no teacher appointed a principal appointed to their school for months and months. And upon just asking information from the Ministry of Education about what steps have been taken to actually fill this vacancy, within a week, a principal was appointed. Or a constituent in a village in Nonagama who asked or asked the information about the appointment of a permanent doctor to their rural hospital. Upon asking that, within the space of a month, a permanent doctor was appointed to that area. So in case of critical illness, they didn't have to, walk all the way to a larger hospital. So these are the real consequences, actually, like positive impact that this right to information has had. So that's why this is important for the people. And in the same way, we're focusing on the private sector. This is just as important to the private sector as a key tax-paying, contributing constituent of a democracy. So what is the right to information is, I think, what everyone is here to understand. I think people pretty much understand why it's important, and that's why you're here. So when you think about what the right to information is, it was first, as Moki said, incorporated by way of the Constitution as a fundamental right, but they went a step further and introduced this by way of a law. That means we don't have to go to the Supreme Court to be able to use the right to information on a day-to-day basis. You can, every citizen of Sri Lanka has the right of access to information that is held in the possession of public authority, right? So now you have three elements to what I just said. So it's the right of access, citizens' right of access to information held by public authorities, right? So then you have the three elements of who is a citizen, who is a public authority, and what is the information you can ask for, right? So if you think about who a citizen is, and this is really interesting, normally we would think about human citizens of Sri Lanka, right? And people also tend to assume that you need to be above 18 years of a voting age to be able to ask for information, but this is not true. Any citizen of Sri Lanka can ask for information. And a citizen also means anybody of which the citizenship is more than 3/4 citizens of Sri Lanka. And that body can also be an incorporated body or an unincorporated body. So if you take a Samupakara Samitiya in a village, that Samupakara Samitiya can ask for information in its own name. So it doesn't have to be registered under the Companies Act or anything like that, provided 3/4 of their membership are Sri Lankan citizens. So that is who a citizen is. It can be a child, it can be any citizen of Sri Lanka. It can be a company requesting in the company's name. It can be a collective, it could be a chamber or a business association. And in the same way, it can be a group of people who have just organized themselves as a membership. They can ask information. So that is who a citizen is and who can ask information. Then you come to the second element of what is the information you can ask for, right? So when within the definition of information, what we can ask for is anything, basically, to make it easier for us to remember, it is anything that is on record, right? So it could be on record by way of a voice recording, it could be by way of a letter, a certified document, it could be in a CD, it could be on a computer somewhere, right? As long as it is recorded, it is information, right? So this could mean documents, it could mean in India, even WhatsApp groups that are used by officials have been defined as information that people can ask for, right? So samples of things. So there's an interesting story about the Southern Expressway. When the Southern Expressway was being built, somebody had requested a sample of the material used to build the Southern Expressway. And this is completely within the Right to Information Act. This makes it easy. And there was another story of somebody who had asked for information about asked for a sample of the football being used by the Moratuwa University, right? So these are also things you can ask for. So as you can see, it's a very broad definition. And you can even ask for things like draft laws, maps, right? Models of things. So in addition to, the paper that you normally think of, you can ask for all these things. And that is what is called information in the Right to Information Act. Then you come to the element of a public authority. We have said you can ask for, the RTI Act says, a citizen can ask for information that is held by a public authority. So a public authority has a broad definition. So basically any government agency qualifies as a public authority. So you can ask for information from any government agency. So departments, ministries, universities, schools, provincial councils, all of this. And in addition to this, what may be most interesting to those present here today, there are also two instances where private sector organizations are also required to give information. That is, people can ask for information from private sector organizations as well. We can go into that in a little more detail if you like later, Mokshini, or would you like me to go into it now? A bit later, maybe.
Maybe later, once you finish this segment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. If you think about who public authorities are, it is not limited just to government authorities. It's usually, as a broad understanding, it's usually people and entities, the entities that are working on a public function or have to have a level of public accountability. So that is what the right to information is. And it has two key elements. Now, this is the request. We always think of the right to information as a request-driven process. You need to ask for information to get it. But if you think of RTI as standing on two main pillars, the one side is the request-driven information disclosure. The other and equally important side is the proactive disclosure of information. Now, under the regulations under the Right to Information Act, There's an almost utopian list of information that public authorities are required to disclose about any key decisions made, any key documents that they need to have, about budgets, about actual expenses, right? If any public project is being undertaken that costs over 500,000 rupees or over 100,000 US dollars, information about that needs to be given to the relevant people of that area, the people to whom that applies, months ahead of the project commencing. So proactive disclosure is also a key pillar of the right to information.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sankita. That really gave us the opening for us to delve deeper into this topic. Now, all of this, what the basic information you gave us right now is what exactly constitutes the right to information and what are the basic elements of the Right to Information Act. But what I would like to know now is, right, for a private citizen as well as for a private sector organization, how can they avail of the rights that have been set out in the Right to Information Act in order to obtain the information that they require? Now, you said that there are two pillars. One is one is the requesting and the other is the disclosure, and both are equally important, but those are the two pillars on which the Act stands. If you could help us to understand how people can avail of the Act in order to get the information they require.
Thanks. Yeah. So proactive disclosure is relatively easy. So I will start with that one. The other one is not difficult either. So proactive disclosure of information requires public authorities to make information available in some form, ideally in electronic form as well. But the principle behind proactive disclosure is that the information is made available to those who need it, right? So there's a panchayat in India that wrote information that was necessary to its local citizens on the walls of the panchayat, right? So that is also proactive disclosure. But normally information should be made available on the premises of a public authority and also on their websites as well. So you should also think about accessibility. If the constituents, if the people that need them are those that are disabled, they should be able to access that information adequately. Maybe it may need to be available auditorily. So information needs to be basically, as basic principles for proactive disclosure, it needs to be accessible and available, right? So that is proactive disclosure. So basically on websites and on the premises. On request-driven disclosure, there is a very simple one-page document that you can fill. It's called the RTI 1 form. You can find it on rti.gov.lk or rtiwatch.lk. We can drop those links in the chat. RTI Watch is run by TISL. That you can fill in. It just asks basic information about your name, about your address, so that they can get in touch with you and what the information you're asking for is, and also in what form you want it. Do you want a certified document? Do you want a recording? Do you want to come and see a sample? So it's basically a matter of underlining it. They ask you whether you're a citizen of Sri Lanka, and they ask you also whether the information pertains to the life and liberty of a person. If it does, then the public authority is bound to give you the information within 48 hours. That's why they ask you that information. So it's a very simple document. And if you don't, there are timelines within which public authorities need to respond to you. So within 14 days, you should receive a response letting you know whether or not they're giving you the information. And if you don't receive the information or you don't receive a response, there's an even simpler appeal form that you can send to the same public authority, to generally the head of the organization or someone very senior who is named as the designated officer, and that appeal can be sent. And if that also doesn't work, you send an appeal to the Right to Information Commission. The commission by 2019, so 2 years into the Right to Information Act being operationalized, had heard almost 3,000 cases. So those are the appeals that are going up. So just imagine the number of RTIs that are being used, the number of people using the right to information. It's in the tens of thousands by now already in Sri Lanka in the first 5 years of implementation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's as simple as going to rtiwatch.lk or what was the other one? rti.gov.lk. So rti.gov.lk and rti.watch.lk. It's just a form that needs to be filled and submitted. Who do we have to submit it to, Sankita, and how?
Yeah, it is to the information officer in any public authority. If you don't know the name, you can just send it in the addressing it to the information officer, but ideally you can just give a call and find out. You can email, you can technically even call in a right to information request. You can just give a call and then they need to consider it a request, or you can register post it. We generally recommend register posting and keeping a copy for yourself so that if you have to appeal, you can use that as an attachment.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so that actually gives me the opportunity to segue into my questions to Subhashini. Subhashini, now based on what Sankita has told us, it seems to be a fairly simple process invoking the provisions of the Act to obtain the information that a citizen would require. And Sankita has also told us that it is not just a private individual, not a private citizen, but also a private sector, even a company that has not even been registered, an organization that can make use of this Act to get information that they require. Now, I found information online about a report that was published by Verite Research back in 2018 about some research that was conducted by Verite in collaboration with the World Bank, where you developed a methodology to monitor online proactive disclosure of information in accordance with the Act. And then you use this methodology to monitor and evaluate online proactive disclosure of information across some 55 odd public authorities, if I'm not mistaken. And unfortunately, the data was quite damning in that it found that only 20% of public authorities scored in the moderately satisfactory band, whereas the majority of 75% scored within the moderately unsatisfactory band, and even as small as 5% scored unsatisfactory. So no authority scored satisfactory or highly satisfactory. So I mean, this is a little discouraging, to say the least. My question to you, Subhashini, is in your work or in the work with Verite, where you assist persons to file requests for information on behalf of those individuals, and in the backdrop of having the legislature making it so easy for people to make use of the Act, have you seen that there isn't enough of requests being lodged by citizens or private sector organizations? That's number one. Number two, in your experience, why would it be that these public authorities are scoring so badly in the acceding to these requests for information? I'm sorry, I'm coupling these two questions together in light of the fact that this data has come out from your 2018 report. But if you could use this opportunity to enlighten us on the work that Verite does as well on assisting people to file these requests, and your experience on how frequently these requests are lodged, whether it's not satisfactory enough, first and foremost, the request being lodged, and thereafter, why you feel that there is this lethargy or why it's so unsatisfactory. I'm opening it up to you so that you can use the floor to really hit hard on this point and educate us on this, Subhashini.
Thank you, Mokshini, for the interesting questions. So the work we did initially, I believe, just like Transparency International, when the RTI Act was passed, right to information is something, act being there is really useless unless people make use of it, right? So for right to information act in a way wants to drive transparency, drive accountability. In a way. So the way you can drive transparency and accountability is actually by citizens exercising their right. And in this, just like many others, we thought it's important for citizens to be aware of that, right? So we were particularly focusing on the private sector, especially private sector outside Colombo. So we did several training programs with regional chambers to educate the private sector about the Right to Information Act, and also to really initially to tell people, because it's unfamiliar, so we thought, let's encourage people to make use of it. While Right to Information Act is very simple, my experience with the private sector, having worked for 10 years in the chamber, is also they're always in a hurry to get the information, because business, sometimes their decisions and their shipments, their consignments may be lying in the port, maybe waiting for approval from the customs, and for most of them, waiting for 14 days was not really good enough. Plus, also, you realize when you come to SMEs and the chambers, the waiting time, the follow-up time, all of that, it can take up to 28 days. So we thought, initially people might feel discouraged, right? So you must show that there are certain outcomes. That is why we felt like let's first tell people like there is value in using this, and you can experience positive results. Just like Sankita said, Verite Research, for our research, extensively files for Right to Information. And since the act has been passed, I think as a research organization, for every research we do, we have extensively used Right to Information Act, and we have been able to get a lot of information that would not have been accessible without the act because of that. So we as a research organization finds it very useful, very valuable, and we wanted private sector to feel the same way, realize that there is value in it, and they can actually access information and not be too discouraged by some bottlenecks and delays that they may experience. So that's why initially we said, after the training, we offered the SMEs and the regional chambers, if you really want to file Right to Information, and ask for information. If you have a particular authority, particular agency that you want information from, maybe we can assist you, right? To take you, one is fill the form on your behalf, even file it on your behalf, or even help you if you want to file it yourself, right? But you realize that unlike maybe Sankita's experience with the people, for the private companies, initial uptake wasn't that great, Mokshini. People found the training program useful, the information valuable, but really getting into action, there were delays. But there was a few instances where chase and also filing it on their own, there was a lot more reluctance. So I will tell you sometimes, but people did want information. I will, one association that is involved in agriculture trade, for example, was telling me how they see on papers every day that there is this project funded by this agency, that project funded by another agency, introducing various things into agriculture, introducing technology. But they were saying, we are in dark. We don't know what is going on, and nobody talks to us about these projects, and we don't know nobody asks our opinion, bids, and we want to contribute. And then they were asking, can we find out information about all the foreign funded agriculture projects in Sri Lanka, what they aim to do, who is funding it, which agency is responsible in Sri Lanka, and who are the contact people. So they can actually get in touch with them and find out and see how they can connect with the project. So actually we filed it with the External Resources Department, because any foreign funding into the government comes to the External Resources Department, and we got information without any problem. The ERD gave us the relevant information with the relevant contact people, and that wasn't difficult at all. And then secondly, there was another gentleman who said, I have been applying for a permit, and this government agency have been, basically delaying it and asking me for various documents, endless documents. When I submit one document, they tell me to give me another document. I can't even challenge them because I can't find a documented process. I can find a process documented to say these are the documents that is required for me to submit, and this is the decision-making criteria, so that even if he wants to challenge this authority for delaying it or denying it, he has no way because he doesn't have documented information. And then he was like, can you just get this documented for me, right? So when you actually, file for information and ask, okay, there is this permit that is required, and this is, Sankita can verify, these are information that should be proactively disclosed. Not even the government agency should actually publish the process, publish the decision-making criteria, timelines, all of these. And we did get the information across. Then thirdly, there was another instance where there's a regulatory authority, according to their act, they were supposed to publish all their processes, make public all their processes. The act itself specifies that they need to publish. But then the private sector who is involved in that sector was saying, actually, we can't find any of these documents, and they're supposed to publish it according to the act. And then, of course, we filed for that information. And upon refusal, we had to even go to the RTI Commission. But there are certain things where you actually do not necessarily succeed enough. So you do find various resource constraints being cited, various issues with the legal draftsman getting stuck. So you do realize that some things can get dragged on, and this is where sometimes the private sector can get discouraged, not just the private sector, even individuals as well. But it is really important to understand that there are many wins as well, right? There are many instances you do get the information, and also you do drive accountability. Lastly, I would like to say this about encouraging and driving accountability for our budget. So we run a platform called Budget Promises, so a dashboard on our publicfinance.lk website, where we actually try to map the progress of the proposals listed in the budget speech. And at one point, there was a lot of proposals by the Ministry of Megapolis that we had to go and ask information for. And there was this one officer who had basically saying, these people always come and every year, every 6 months, ask us for all this information. Why don't you just put them on the website, right? Why are you just keeping them? Why are we have to just entertain these individuals coming and asking for this information? Just put it up on the web platform. And we realized actually they had all the information on the web platform that year, right? So you can actually drive this kind of, greater transparency through this kind of requests as well. So Mokshini, you had a second question about why the reluctance. So when we talk to the regional chambers and just the private sector in general, one is culture, right? You are used to a certain way of accessing information, and you have more confidence in your networks, your contacts, your informal ways of getting information. You sort of basically feel, oh, I trust that information more, and I already have access. I know who to call to get information. Why should I bother, RTIing? So there is this culture where people feel, I trust this information, which is, to me, I personally feel that it can be very risky because you are relying a lot on your relationship and verbal information, which cannot be challenged. Maybe Mokshini, as a lawyer, you and Sankita, I'm an economist, can verify, right? The risk of, basically relying on verbal information. I will also tell another instance where a private sector official who was a company head was telling me how, for once, with a certain authority, he used to do a business, right, regularly. He got approval for certain business for about 10 years. And all of a sudden, this officer changed, right? And then the next officer who came basically said, look, according to our act or whatever process, I can't give you permission to do this. Now the fact that he actually did it for 10 years, and from what he explained, it was not an illegal business, but there must be some provision, something. But the fact that he did not have anything in documentation, right? It was a relationship, it was verbal, it happened verbally. And obviously you don't have a way to say, oh, now all of a sudden this officer he really says, I can't do this business, right? So there are the private sector also runs enormous risks of doing things relying on verbal information and verbal assurances. But we have a culture where we are used to do work like that, and we seem to feel like that's fine. The second is more serious. The second one is the fear of penalization. So the private sector, and that comes with the culture and attitude of the government. So the government also feels we are the custodians of this information. Somehow we own this information, not the public. And there is this thing that you feel offended when you are asked for information. If you are asked, they might feel like, you are encroaching into my territory, right? And this is none of your business. So there is fear that I'm going to offend the officials, that I have to go every year, every month to get permit, get an approval, get my registration renewed. And now if I offend this officer by requesting for information, it's going to be a lot more difficult for me to do business. So I think we have a culture of on one hand, people feeling, I have these informal channels, I trust them, I've done business like that for so many years, why bother? Then you have a culture of government that says, oh, who are you to ask information from me? But people don't realize on both ends we are losing in this system. And I think the Right to Information Act is an important tool, because this is a negative culture that is very important to really, break it. But Mokshini, it takes time, I think, right? So it takes time for people to realize, government to realize, I shouldn't be offended if people ask me to document the process or give me actually it makes their life easier, right? Of course, we can discuss later, there are perks and privileges embedded into opaque system and a process. But not everyone is like that, right? People like fair, transparent systems where there is a lot more predictability as well. So I think it makes life easier for everyone. It makes business processes a lot more efficient, effective. But it takes time for us to get out of this mindset.
Thank you so much, Subhashini. So basically, I would just like to kind of offer you an opportunity to elaborate on this. Sankita, during her answer to her second question, she used the word utopian to kind of describe the range of information people can have access to through the Act. But sometimes this word can have a negative connotation in that we see a utopia as an impossible dream, and it's just, counterproductive to even try to attain such an impossible dream. And the reason I mention this is because you mentioned the right to information as a way to battle corruption by facilitating transparency and driving accountability. But as you very correctly pointed out during your answer just now, players in the private sector might consider this utopia in that sense not achievable, and it is quite it can be distinguished from the reality of how business is done in Sri Lanka, in the sense that corruption has become so intrinsic in our system that you can't do without it, you can't achieve anything without it, right? And demanding accountability and facilitating transparency might actually prejudice your business and cause you harm. But you mentioned that this is a negative culture and that we need to break it. Now, my question to you, Subhashini, is why? Why do we need to break this culture? If it is working for us, then why on earth should we break it?
That's a great question. So I think one of the factors that we need to understand is why there are. If you look at the entire private sector in the country, we know most of our private sector comprise of small and medium enterprises, right? And actually, what this culture does is it denies opportunities for many companies, many potential entrepreneurs who does not have the necessary access to the networks and who does not have the ability or the funds to pay their way or pay all the way to all these officers to get the information, to get the documents processed, to get access, right? So those actually, I would say majority are people without very good access to networks and very good lot of money that they can throw away at these officials. And thirdly, they can't afford to pay because then their business becomes unprofitable. Because especially since I work in international trade, you know, global market is a highly competitive market where buyers make the call on price. Very rarely small suppliers like Sri Lanka can make a call on the price. So if you really can't meet their price point, or if you can't, and also time, right? Delivery times, because of the delays that is caused due to a lot of vagueness, right? Your consignment, somebody may say, no, this can't go through because this document is not there, that document is not there, I can't clear it. That unpredictability builds into your ability to compete in the global market. And for a country for a country that wants to promote exports, who is in dire need of foreign exchange, this is really a negative development. So for all these reasons, I mean, and also you have a culture where companies that thrive may do so because of their networks and special access and deep pockets they have, rather than on the merit. And this is also very negative for a country because they might succeed in the country, Mokshini, but they will not be competitive enough to go outside the country where they don't have similar access and networks. So the companies that you are encouraging and nurturing may not be internationally competitive in that sense. And you may be denying opportunities with people with great ideas, great entrepreneurial skills, by creating this very unfair business environment where certain people, because information is power, right, Mokshini? I mean, especially business-related information gives you enormous power. So you can actually block your competitors by you having exclusive access to information and others not having the same information at the right time. So I think for most of the SMEs and entrepreneurs that want to start a business in this country, breaking this culture is critically important. And as a country who wants to create internationally competitive businesses, this is not a great place to be in. So we need to really improve our business environment.
Brilliant. So there you have it. Subhashini just broke down for us how the right to information assists in facilitating a break in this culture of corruption in business in Sri Lanka. And more so, she actually helped us to understand how breaking the cycle of corruption is good for business. It's not just being about democracy minded or being about a responsible citizen. Yes, those are good enough reasons to demand right to information and to be a rights conscious entity in Sri Lanka. But at the same time, it also, let's face it, in the private sector, we are all about rupees and cents. You know, is it going to affect my bottom line? Is my business going to be adversely affected? Look, you will talk a big talk about, you know, rights and democracy, but I mean, come and do business in my sector, in my company. You will see how difficult it is to get anything done without doing, you know, lining a few pockets here and greasing a few palms there. You know, and it's interesting how the right to information has now become kind of the other side of the coin. It's almost, it's a part of this conversation on fighting corruption. It's supposed, ostensibly, it's only about the right to information. But now we see how this right to information and demanding it is a very valuable tool in the fight for accountability and the fight against corruption. And I'm so grateful for Subhashini using her wealth of experience to educate us on how not being a cog in the wheel of corruption can actually benefit each individual private sector organization, and through that, the economy of Sri Lanka at large. So that would actually help me now to pose my third question to Sankita. Sankita, in your work at TISL, have you come across situations where private sector organizations have utilized the Act to get information and as a result have been marginalized or prejudiced? Or have they actually been able to benefit? And have you actually seen, tangible changes made as a result of private sector companies using this asset of the Right to Information Act my question is this: in the process of trying to get information for themselves, have they been able to effect change for a broader segment of private sector organizations?
Thanks, Moki. So in our own experiences so far, we have not had private sector organizations coming forward needing assistance from us to file right to information requests. But we know on a few rare occasions, in addition to what Subhashini mentioned, in the orders of the RTI Commission, we find that there have been several instances where private sector entities have used the Right to Information Act. And one example is where Dialog asked information from the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, and the TRC was directed to provide the information on allocation of spectrum frequency to state-controlled Mobitel, right? So that information was the information that was asked to be disclosed was about the process that was followed, about whether due process was followed. So this is an interesting use of the right to information, right? And in the same way, this goes to the larger question of this RTI hesitancy in the private sector, right? So it can be used. It can be used in, say, government procurement processes, right? We understand. I mean, we also know that the losers in procurement are not always clean either. The winners and losers can all be complicit sometimes, but sometimes there are often there are instances where you lose in a tender process. You invested so much time and effort and money in coming up with a bid, and then you lose out for no explicable reason, right? No understandable reason. So in situations like that, I think the right to information can be your ally, can be your it can be your best ally, in that you also indicate to the public authorities and to the state that first, that you're bona fide engaging in this process and that you're going to use the right processes to hold them accountable, that transparency can actually end up disinfecting this process, as President Obama at one point mentioned about how the freedom of information can be a disinfectant in that sense. So you can respect your political alliances. It was an interesting quote. So you can use the right to information to shed some light on process. So, and thereby you kind of have a positive chilling effect. You have a chilling effect on these processes. And when people know you're watching, or when somebody has filed a request, at least for the next time, they'll be a little more careful, right? A little more concerned. And this has happened. We know that the then Director General of the Right to Information Commission mentioning that there have been processes where ministers have sent lists of people to be employed or somebody to be favored, and the secretary turned around and said, look, what if somebody sends an RTI about this? I am accountable to respond, so I cannot do this. So this kind of process can be used, but it is being used very little by the private sector. So this RTI hesitancy for me, honestly, and I think for a lot of us, in just from the private sector is a little inexplicable, because we've seen tens of thousands of citizens using it. We've seen politicians using it. We've seen civil society using it. We've seen journalists using it extensively. So, I mean, what is so different in the conditions, and I'm happy to hear from the audience as well in the Q&A section, what is it that sets the private sector apart? There is this question of reprisals also, right? Can there be reprisals? Can there be a negative impact from asking the question? In the abstract, I mean, there is a possibility that a particular official or a particular institution will take offense at receiving a right to information request. But by now, this conversation is already happening. In Sri Lanka, the right to information is being used more and more as a conversation starter, right? As a dialogue with public authorities, not as a challenge, not as something that you're using to bring someone down, but just as a normal exercise of a democratic function. You just file a request, and then you can call and follow up. You can have a perfectly pleasant conversation subsequent to filing an RTI request. It is not meant to be a challenge, and we would also encourage our audience to use it not as a challenge, but as a way to start that conversation. I've had multiple very interesting conversations where public authorities have just called back and said, can you help me understand not why, but what exact information you need, right? What is the scope? Do you need all of this information for the past 10 years, or do you need it for this particular deal? It can really make things easier for you. And if you're worried about losing networks, it can help you actually gain access to a legitimate network of people, of public officials, of people who are doing the right thing and will help you get through the process by, giving you the right information. So I'll just end by adding one more thing. I think I'm going a little beyond the scope of your question, Moki, right now, but Subhashini mentioned SMEs, right? So sometimes we'll find that larger companies have these networks established in a way that, assist them in carrying corrupt networks that will assist them in carrying on their businesses. They may also fail, as Subhashini mentioned. They will fail eventually. They will have costs. But for smaller enterprises and smaller companies as well as for large, there is a power in working together. There is a power in collective action. And the chamber that is helping us host this event today is a good example. Chambers, associations can come together to disengage from these corrupt networks, to try and create a system where they support each other and create that predictability and dependability that businesses need so direly, right? So if the right to information is used collectively as an advocacy tool, as a tool to get information about processes, then if an entire sector or a group of people were to disengage, then the corrupt actors would be less powerful. You also have to understand, as private sector entities, the country needs your business. If people were to refuse to engage in business, even the government would be in serious trouble. So you have power, and you shouldn't always feel like you're a victim of the system, but you can take control of the system by acting positively. And there are examples of this in Thailand in a very similar systemically corrupt context where a group of companies just got together and started certifying each other for following process properly, for having transparent processes within themselves in their dealings with the government and with other sectors. And what their ultimate goal, and they have over 2,000 companies working together now, where their ultimate goal is to get government to recognize companies with that certification as a priority, as priority companies in government procurement. So there are possible routes if you work together as well, if you feel like you're powerless on your own as an individual business as well.
Great, thanks, Ankita. No, you did not go off topic at all. You perfectly brought in that example as well to help us to understand how The right to information can be used collectively as an advocacy tool as well in fighting the system of corruption. So thank you so much for educating us on that. You did mention the fact that there is this fear of reprisal, and this fear seems to be unfounded based on the facts and the figures and the act and what it can do for us. So before we open up the floor for a series of questions from the audience, I would like to give Subhashini the opportunity to enlighten us. Subhashini, as an economist and someone who works in an organization like Verite, I'm going a slightly off script here, I hope you don't mind, but I want to take the opportunity to really make use of the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that you hold, on how corruption has actually, because we're now talking about the right to information. We have talked about how it is utilized, the practical implementation of it, and we have now, the conversation has progressed very organically to this discussion on transparency and corruption, and how the Right to Information Act can be used to fight corruption. But can we just take a step back a little bit and can you help us to understand why corruption is bad for business? There has been a lot over the last few years on the ease of doing business, the index, and that is used as an example or a symbol of how well a country runs, how well the country's private sector and business is run, and how beneficial and how an economy can grow as a result. But could you just help us? I know this might seem a very simplistic question to you, but could you just help us to understand? We sometimes assume corruption is bad, but tell us, why is it bad? You're muted.
Sorry, my engagement with the private sector, especially the SMEs and the regions, there was research we have done. People are not happy about having to pay all the officials. I think Sankita made this comment that people feel we are victims of the system. And frequently, this is one of the issues. Most of the people we say, if I don't pay the I mean, it's not just to pay all of these people. I can't function as a business. So it's become so grounded. No, people feel like this is how you do business in Sri Lanka. It's normalized, right? People just accept, and they grumblingly accept. It's not, I mean, there are people who willingly do it because they know I can cut off competition. I can make sure my competitor doesn't get a bid. I can make sure that I get the access, I get a deal, I get a contract. So to me, those are people who willingly do that to block another person's access. But there are, sadly, Mokshini, a lot of people who pay simply for their survival. It's not to block anybody off. It's just simply to survive. And it is very, very sad, from policemen to the health inspectors to every person to the urban council officials, everybody, right? Because actually, one of the biggest problems, Mokshini, is there is no documented processes and procedures. Rarely, you mentioned about the proactive disclosure. We have done also research about proactive disclosure on business processes, especially in relation to trade, imports and exports. And we realized it's so difficult to find very basic information, from what documents do I have to submit, which person do I have to contact, how long will it take to get the processes, how much do I have to pay, what is the appeal procedure in place, where are the application forms, how can I submit application forms. So one would consider these are very, very basic information. Any functioning government should make it available, simply because, Mokshini, regulations are there to protect consumers, protect environment, protect citizens, prevent illegal practices. A government and a public authority who is genuinely interested in upholding this regulation to protect consumers, environment, all of that, first thing they should make is make it so easy for people to access and comply. What happens when people can't access and comply? It is as a consumer, I am at risk. as a citizen of this country, my country's environment is at risk, right? So the idea is, from the government authorities' perspective, making information available, making it easy for people to access is their duty, right? But like you said, duty, people are not motivated by duty and morals, which is sadly the case. And it is getting worse, not better in the world, sadly. And businesses are the same, right? So you realize that opacity brings you money outside your official payments, and then you develop a business community that feels, without paying I can't get things done, right? So this is where I feel it's very sad is the SMEs that I have met on ground, who tell me of who has told me of stories of their life, and there were businesses who said, I gave up certain businesses because it's simply impossible. I mean, there are people who close down businesses because the corruption and harassment, right? Because if you do not pay, you get harassed. And and harassment is so unbearable. They felt like, I can't continue doing this business. And this is so bad for the country. So like I think Sankita Sankita actually gave a very good example of saying collective action, right? So this is something which the business community really needs to make use of. And I feel so sad to see that associations and chambers really not. I mean, I think Right to Information provides a huge opportunity for the chambers and associations to really get the governments to document and publish the procedures and processes. So you're not asking about, this is not asking individuals asking about how did you decide to award this tender. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, imagine the government introduces a certain regulation that says you need to get this approval from these authorities if you want to import or export, right? And this is published in a gazette, just one paragraph. Now you don't know who the contact person is. You don't know what documents. So a chamber or an association in that particular sector can simply be proactive and help their members by just filing an RTI with the authority and say, can you please tell us, right? Let us know what are the documents, what is the process, what is the decision-making criteria, timeline. And by really helping their members to get documented information, and this is nothing controversial. You're not asking for anything sensitive. You're simply saying, I'm trying to help my members, reduce the cost and time my members have to incur in doing their day-to-day business. And the chambers and associations have an enormous opportunity, which is really underutilized. Second is Mokshini budget proposals, right? So I know all chambers and associations give a long list of, being at the chamber, I know a long list of proposals to the budget and say our members want this done, our members want that done, our members want. But rarely, they don't realize when you're engaging with the government, really an Right to Information can help for you to find out what happened to your budget proposals, right? And what decisions, and then secondly, how well it is progressing. By filing RTI, you can encourage progress, Mokshini. You can simply, 3 months up the budget year, you just file RTI saying, our members filed this and we were very happy to see this in the budget speech and we really thank whatever. You can also tell all of that and say, we are going to just file an RTI. So just like Sankita said, you can even have a conversation and file it, right? And just say, we are great, but we just want to find out this, what happened in 3 months. And that RTI itself can be an incentive, a nudge, Sankita, right? It can nudge the officers to say, the private sector is keen for this to happen. Private sector is interested and they're following up. And also that gives you information to engage with the government. Then later you can tell the minister and say at any other meeting, minister, we filed this RTI, but we are very sad and we were very happy that you really included in the budget. We would love to see this, but our RTI says zero progress. And that is how you encourage these things to be implemented. So I feel it's heavily underutilized. Mokshini, sadly, chambers and associations have enormous room to create a better business environment by using RTI more frequently.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Subhashini and Sankita. I think one key takeaway from this is that the RTI is so underutilized, and it is tragic that this is the case in view of the fact that the advantages to not just the private sector but an individual far exceeds any fear of reprisal that they might have. And that the only way, the proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is in the tasting. So we, members of the private sector, the only way of finding out is by actually doing the work of filing a request. And the more that this happens, and the more that public authorities are forced to give this information, then we will start to see the benefits in motion. We'll slowly start to reap the benefits of having these public organizations held accountable, and it actually acts as a deterrent to corruption and arbitrary decision making and so on. So thank you so much to both of you, Sankita and Subhashini. We have some very, very interesting questions that are coming in. Sankita, there is one question I believe would enable you to also touch on what you kind of shelved for later, and that is about how a private sector organization, a company, can be considered as a public authority where the Right to Information Act is concerned. The question is, can we get information from the private sector companies who provide services to public authorities through the RTI? Over to you.
Thank you for that question from the audience. So, as I mentioned, the right to information is the citizens' right of access to information held by public authorities, right? And I mentioned that there are two instances where private sector organizations are also identified as public authorities. And the first example is exactly what our audience member has said, which is if a private company is on a contract with a state or is carrying out a public function, a statutory function, under a partnership with the state or with a license or an agreement with the state, with the government or local agencies, etc., then about that public activity, that service they're performing, that private sector organization is also bound to give information, which means citizens can ask the public entity for information, but citizens can also ask information directly from the private entity, right? So if you're a private sector organization that contracts with the state or operates under a license of the state, now this is where it gets really interesting. We know there are all kinds of organizations that have to receive financial institutions. It could be bar licenses. It can range very wide. You're liable to give information that is covered under that work you're doing, and only to that extent, right? So the logic is any work that is done in the public interest or under a public mandate is liable to right to information request. So that is one instance where private sector organizations are bound to provide information, not as a requester, but as a giver of information, or as somebody who's liable to give information. The second instance under which a private entity has to be a public authority or is considered a public authority is where the state or a state corporation or them jointly own over 25% of shares in a private sector organization, in an organization. So usually we consider something a public organization or a government entity if it's over 50% shares, if 50% ownership is with the state. But this here, it's 25%. So if anything over 25% ownership is held by the state or a state corporation or jointly both of those, then you also become a public authority and you're liable to give information. That means you need to have an information officer who is educated about the Right to Information Act and who has to follow those timelines, etc.
Great. So if there are any participants here who are representatives of such a company that has shareholdership that exceeds 25% by a public authority, a public entity, then bear in mind that in terms of the Right to Information Act, you are bound to provide information when requested, and you are bound by the provisions of the Right to Information Act. Thank you so much to you, Sankita, and also to the person who posed that question. It really gave us the opportunity to go into this area. Subhashini, there is a question on the reliability of the information. I believe that's what the question touches on here. The question is, how can citizens know if the information given is verified? I think what the main gist of that question is, how reliable is the information that is provided by a public authority when a request is made for information?
So maybe Sankita can also come in here, because I believe government will share the information it has. Whether the information is, I will give you about budget estimates, for example, right? So actually, Verite research has frequently shown the budget estimates the government produces are inaccurate, right? And they're not reliable, and that is a problem, right? We have a lot of reports that tells us government's tax calculations are wrong, government's tax forecasts are wrong, right? And that is one of the reasons why we are in the muddle we are in today. But for the government under the RTI Act, they will give you the information that they have, right? So if the government estimates published is that, right, they will share it with you. So the accuracy of information, maybe Sankita can be, if your database has, for example, if it's education data, the teachers, all of that by provinces, if the database has not been updated, if the database has errors, if all of that, but they will give you the documented information. Maybe the report does not accurately capture all the English teachers in the northern province, right? But that is what the document says. So the act itself, as far as I know, Sankita, does not really put a burden on the government to check the accuracy of the information, but share the information that is within this thing. So for the budget promises and others, this is important if you're asking for data, for sure. Because if you are trying to get government data to do your analysis and business planning, as a researcher, I would strongly advocate to take it with a pinch of salt and do your own due diligence. That's really important. But if it is government agency telling you, documenting and saying, these are the documents you need to submit and this is the decision criteria, and they give it to you on one of their letterheads, that is reliable. Because that is something that is confident. Does that mean they will not exercise discretion? That's, I'm sure, as the private sector, Sri Lanka's government, right? And government authorities and public officials, they will still exercise their discretion, right? But it will reduce, to me, 80% of the hassle you're going through, not the 100%. And to me, it is step by step. We have a system that is really broken down. I think Nishan at once said our private sector has been operating in a broken system. And people are so used to functioning in a broken system, it is very difficult for them to even imagine functioning in a functional system, right? So it cannot happen overnight. But if we do not use this opportunity and really push the government to change their behavior, we will never be able to fix our broken system.
Sankita, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of what you can obtain under the Right to Information Act, you can ask for a certification. You can ask for a certification from the public authority for your information. So in doing so, I can also add another question as well. So when you request an information, you will do it in your name because they have to get in touch with you, right? So once you do that, you can also indicate that you want certified information. And the RTI Act says that you cannot be penalized for using this information in any legal way you want, which means you can produce it as evidence in court. So a public authority takes a lot of responsibility when they provide you information. And then the next point is the RTI Act also prescribes certain offenses. So if any public official, right, not just the information officer, any public official provides information that is falsified, inaccurate, if it's altered in any way, in a malicious way, for all of these things, a public official can be held liable. They can be prosecuted by the Right to Information Commission and be liable to up to 50,000 rupees or 2 years imprisonment. So they run the risk of doing that if they give you wrong information of experiencing that. So if you suspect that you have received wrong information upon application to the RTI Commission, you can indicate this to the Right to Information Commission, and the Commission can call for the information, examine it, and decide what should be done from there on.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to just pose 2 more questions to you that have come in, which are actually perfect. They've helped what both of you have discussed, help us to transition into this. Sankita, this is also with regards to the process involved. I think the person has asked, whether the request can be made anonymously. But essentially, the question says this: will the identity of the information requester be disclosed to the institution the information is being requested from? Okay, just touch on that, please, quickly. But also, in addition to that, just to build on the previous question about private sector entities also being considered as public authorities for the purpose of the Act, and that anyone can seek information from them. One concern that has been raised is that even employees would be able to request information about their salaries and perks and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on this? So perhaps you can take the first question about anonymity and the identity of the requester, and then touch on this other point about what you think about, people being able to get information about a private sector's salary scales. And Subhashini, if you can also touch on that question, and also answer the question about the commission. There's been a very, very good and pertinent question about how successful the commission has been. Over to you, lady. Sankita, if you could start, and then with the conclusion of your answers, Subhashini, just take over. I will not interrupt.
Sure. So in terms of anonymity, Sri Lanka's RTI Act has not provided for an anonymous request for information. There have been examples elsewhere through online systems where people would file in the name of mickeymouse@gmail.com, and this is a real example from any, that's how requests are made. But Sri Lanka doesn't provide for that. The Act doesn't provide for that. And because the right is for a citizen, and because the requestee, so the public authority, needs to get in touch with you, it is always best to disclose your identity if you're concerned, if you're so concerned. And so far we have not seen reprisals taking place except on very, very less than 0.5% of RTIs, I would confidently say, have resulted in reprisals, right? So there is no requirement to be anonymous, but if you want to, then you can file as a group, right? As I mentioned, you can file in the name of an association, as a group of individuals. Then you'll have that kind of safety in numbers reassurance. On the point of private sector organizations having to disclose salaries and perks and things like that, as I mentioned, there are only two instances, right? So if you are contracting with the state, then the information that can be asked from you is only about that work you're doing with the state or licensed under the state. So it's your call whether this kind of salary information and perks information falls under that. If it does, then you are bound to give that because there is a level of public interest in that information. The same way public sector senior salary grades are supposed to be proactively disclosed according to the regulations under the RTI Act. And the second instance, as I mentioned, is if you're state-owned, of over 25% state-owned, then you could be liable to do that. And that again is because of the public interest element of it. But if you are a pure private sector organization and somebody files an RTI with you, or even your employee files an RTI with you, as the RTI Act stands right now, you're not liable to give that information. But if you want to, you're always welcome.
Subhashini, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so on the anonymity, one of the, I mean, because people do have concerns. Imagine I am working, I'm doing this contract or whatever with the Pradeshya Sabha in my area, and this officer knows me if I put my name. So one of the things, maybe Sankita can also, if you elaborate, is that it can be anyone from anywhere in the country, right? So you don't have to, what is very interesting, the anonymity is not there, but you don't have to give a justification or reason. You don't have to have a reason to say, I have a business interest in this, you don't have to provide any justification. It can be your friend, your relative, your somebody who is in Gaul, who is filing to Vaunia Pradeshya Sabha. There is no problem, right? If you're really scared, my name being on there, being me disconnected, which is unfortunate, but I mean, to me, if there is real fear, I mean, this is something we have told some of the regional SMEs who are saying, oh, this officer knows me, you know, then I'm worried that I'm going to be penalized. So you can be strategic, but I think the chambers and associations are the best way to go about doing it. Because then individual companies do not get penalized to the same way. And it is not as easy to penalize an association with 500 members, 1,000 members compared to an individual. So I think you really need to use the collective action, simply because the public sector, unfortunately, has a mindset and a system that works for them, which makes it difficult. So there are always strategies that you can use to get information.
Should I respond to the question about the commission?
Your enthusiasm to respond, I will not deprive you of the opportunity to do so, yes.
Sorry, Subhashini, would you like to go, or is it no?
No, RTI Commission, please go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the commission, I will let its records speak for itself, right? So basically by 2019, there was an assessment done of the commission's orders given until 2019, from 2017 to 2019. And it was found of all the orders it gave, in 85% of the cases, the commission had ordered that the information should be given to the requester. 85% of cases. So I think that is a pretty robust record. Now, there are always, I mean, there's always more that can be done, but just speaking on the strength of the data alone, this shows a very good and positive trend for Sri Lanka, and we really hope that this pro-disclosure kind of mentality and approach will be maintained, because already, as you know, when a citizen deals with the state, or even the private sector deals with the state in kind of like a difficult and corrupt also system, you have a power imbalance, right? So the commission stands there to kind of balance that power, along with the Right to Information Act itself. The commission balances that power imbalance to stand as a mediator between the state and the citizen. And so it's reassuring to know that in 85% of the cases, they have ordered disclosure.
Excellent. That really is encouraging, in view of the fact that in the event a person's endeavor to utilize the Act to get information proves unsuccessful, then they have recourse to the Commission, and the Commission in most instances, as much as 85%, has held that the requester in fact does have the right and ought to get the information. Sankita and Subhashini, we have gone over time, at 10 minutes over time. We were supposed to conclude at 4:30, but I did not have the heart to conclude the discussion without first addressing the questions that have been posed to us. I believe that we've covered all the questions that have been posed to us by the participants. But I will give this opportunity to both of you to perhaps in a minute or so, just to provide some concluding remarks, and thereafter we will close the session. And Subhashini, if you would like to go first, just briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Mokshini. I think I think finally also I would like to really, emphasize the value of chambers and associations taking up RTI and really driving as a service to their members, right? So the chambers are there to provide services to their members, and this can be a great service that the chambers and associations can offer for their members. And one is, sometimes certain things are not just supply driven, they are demand driven. So I think members of the associations and chambers also can really demand or request that their associations and chambers provide this service and request for this service, and that can be a good start, and that can overcome some of the fears that individual companies have, at least in the short run. Thank you, Mokshini.
Yes, and from me, I would just end on talking about a couple of the reasons why we should use the right to information, right? So our Right to Information Act has very specific limited instances where a request can be denied, right? Very specific instances. So personal information that has no relationship to a public activity can be denied. Medical information can be denied. Information that that can cause a serious prejudice to catching an offender or carrying on an investigation can be denied. But those, as you can see, are very specific exemptions. So if you feel like, oh, I can't, there's no point of me asking because it's going to be denied anyway, you do not need to feel that way, right? That is a myth that really needs to be busted in that sense, done away with. And Sri Lanka, most importantly, the strongest feature of our Right to Information Act is that it has something called the public interest override, which means that even if there is a exemption that applies, say the information relates to or creates serious prejudice to national security, still, if the public interest in giving the information is greater than that prejudice that will be caused, the information officer is bound to give that information, needs to disclose that information. That public interest override rides over every exception in Sri Lanka's Right to Information Act, which is very key. So it's very much a law that has been created with this principle of maximum disclosure in mind. Looping back to what Moki was saying at the beginning, it's very much about normalizing the giving of information and making denial of information the exception. So I would end by exhorting our audience today to just try this once. I'm telling you, it's a very, very empowering process. It could be about something that's related to your community, even if it's not about your companies, right? It can change things significantly. It can go so far as to reset your worldview and kind of do away with the jaded view we have of our state, even, because it can be surprisingly effective, right? So give it a chance. It's simple. I mean, you don't even have to use that form I talked about. You can do it in the form of a letter. That is also acceptable. So I would just say, before the color of this meeting and webinar is done and forgotten, I would just encourage you to go online, download the application, send it by way of an email, even on any information you want, and follow the process. It makes things really different. So you can contribute to governance. You can open up government one RTI at a time. So please do that. And we're here to help you if you need help at any point.
What a wonderful way to bring this discussion to a close, Subhashini and Sankita. And permit me, as the moderator of this discussion, to use it as use what you have said in your closing remarks as an opportunity to perhaps encourage the Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, being one of the foremost advocates in enabling the private sector in Sri Lanka, empowering the private sector in Sri Lanka, to use the information that we have and the vast knowledge that we have gained during this webinar to establish and formalize a system through which members of the Chamber of Commerce could be assisted in the process of invoking the provisions of the Act to obtain information. And I'm sure, based on what Subhashini and Sankita have told us, your membership would be truly grateful and appreciative of that endeavor. So with that, I would like to bring this session to a close, not without first, once again, thanking the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for taking the initiative to organize such a fantastic webinar. I do hope that all the participants have been able to benefit from it. I'm sure you have. Thank you to Subhashini and Sankita for taking time off their busy schedules and being so generous with their knowledge and experience. With that, we wrap up this webinar on the right to information in the private sector. I'm Mokshini Jaimanna, and it has been an honor and a privilege hosting you this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mokshini, as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.